Hello, welcome back, and a happy new year from both of us here on the Social Job Podcast. We're back for the first time in 2022 after a very busy but very enjoyable festive period for the both of us.
That's just like a complete lie. But
I didn't want to start the show with like complete negative. It was you. I tried to spin it positively. I was hoping you'd back me up there.
We can't lie to our listeners, mate. We can't.
It was busy. First part, 50%. 1 out of 2 ain't bad. That's true.
100%. It was busy. We ended up working quite a lot over Christmas, which isn't really that much of a problem. You're at home doing nothing anyway. I mean, I'm the kind of person. I don't know. I must be really backwards, but I'm happy with like a day off a week. It's probably the boss mentality and all that, but like then to take like 2 weeks off at Christmas, I was building Lego sets. I built so much Lego. I built Baby Yoda, I built a Thanos. Like seriously, I had nothing to do.
I think it's maybe one of those things where the idea of a day off is much better than the actual day off. Do you ever get that? It's like you sort of think, oh yes, the weekend fight, can't wait, and then you sort of get there and you just sat around like doing nothing. You get and you're like, right, I actually sort of need the structure. So yeah, good to be back. Busy is the right word, but good to be back on the Social Jar. Got some big things coming this year, and we thought we'd kick it off with an episode which I think sets the tone quite nicely for just how prevalent social media is and how important it's going to be in 2022, and perhaps some different trends and movements that we're going to see within the industry that have actually come to dominate wider sort of, I say entertainment might be the right word, as a whole. So what we're going to be talking about is a new study that's come out from the Consumer Technology Association, the CTA, which is to be announced at the upcoming CES industry event, which has found that US consumers now spend as much time streaming videos on social platforms as they do watching traditional TV. Now, whilst this isn't necessarily surprising, it is quite impactful that now we have the data to back up what's felt like something that's been coming for a good few years, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we only have to survey the room here and really just to dig into that topic to back up exactly what we're going to be talking about on the show, which we do have data to support. But do you watch traditional television? I mean, me personally, I have Freeview, and then the rest of it is just subscription platforms, Netflix, Now TV, Amazon. You know, I don't really, even over Christmas, wasn't really flicking over the channels to find something.
Yeah, the only thing I can think that I watched like live is in like scheduled programming is sport. Sport is probably the only thing that I watch live. I don't really have any TV shows that I'm like, oh, 7:30 on a Saturday, this is on. Like it doesn't really, I don't have those anymore, and I quite begrudgingly pay a TV license, quite ironically, so that I can watch things online. So that you watch BBC iPlayer and, you know, and that thing comes up and it's like, do you have a TV license or not? And like, you know, there's sort of in me that sort of goes, you could just press that and you wouldn't have to. But then I'm sort of like, no, model citizen, I'll pay my TV license. But yeah, I pay it because, you know, I watch things on those online platforms. I don't actually watch things in regular TV time slots. And I know that I come from, you know, the social media industry, so perhaps that's not surprising. But yeah, this study, which, you know, incorporated data from 2,000 respondents, so it's not a massive sample size, but it's still a considerable one, found that watching TV via traditional mediums, and they have included subscription-based platforms in that, so Netflix, Prime, Disney Plus, stuff like that, as well as TV, accounted for 38% of all hours watched, like video, that is. However, user-created content on social media platforms made up 39%. So you've actually, it's a 1% increase, but that 1% tells a lot, as we were saying.
Yeah, absolutely. So in their report, when they're talking about user-generated content, they're specifically mentioning video content, which could be a TikTok, for example, gaming content, so you've got Twitch, and then user-generated audio podcasts like the one you listen to right now here with the Social Jar. So yeah, 1% difference, but very empowering, isn't it? If you're a user who is somebody that creates content and is looking to increase their audience, that's a very promising stat.
Yeah, for sure, mate. And I don't think you can underestimate, you know, you mentioned TikTok there, and I don't think you can underestimate just how much of this sort of changing of the guard, I suppose you can call it, is down to them. because before it was sort of YouTube had it to themselves, as we've discussed many times on this podcast. But the rise of TikTok and just the amount of hours that people spend on that platform, I think, will have definitely contributed to this statistic. And I think that is referenced by just how much more emphasized this gets as you change the demographic. As it gets younger, this stat rises. So teens between the age of 13 and 17 spend 56% of their media time with user-created content. And if you flip that to the other side of the coin and go right at the other end, so consumers that are 55% and older, it drops right down to 22%. So teens, compared to that older demographic, it's almost 2.5 times higher for the amount of times they spend watching user-created content. And that I think is... What do you think this means for the industry? Because obviously, as those teens grow up and they become the adults of society, what do you think this means for those more traditional media forms?
Well, I think, as you've nailed that on there, as they grow up, that's everything you need to know. That generally, as humans, as we grow up, we take the habits with us, you know.
Yeah.
So as now most people are used to, you know, spending a lot of time on TikTok, on Twitter, Facebook, looking at content, that will only continue to grow as our habits stay with us as we get older. Now, obviously, just like the newspaper, for example, television in its current format could be classified as a dying breed. You know, I'm looking at the numbers here. Watching traditional television content, the report says 18%, with streaming-based content being 20%. So streaming content, out of these 2,000 people who were surveyed, is higher than the traditional TV content that is consumed by these users. So that in itself as well is talking about the habits of people wanting to have products, having their favorite shows, movies, whatever it is, on demand at their disposal. And that's what it all circles back to. It's about putting the power into the hand of the consumer, not having to, oh no, you know, do you remember like when we were younger and, you know, if there was a program you wanted to watch before the Sky Plus era, where, you know, you'd have to be at home and then you'd have to press record on a VCR, or you could kind of schedule it. It was a bit sketchy. And then, you know, you had to just hope it recorded the whole program. Like, you know, that was like the annoyance of definitely me growing up, like trying to watch Power Rangers, but it was on when I was coming home from school, so I couldn't watch it, so I had to record it. So, you know, all that frustration is now out the window with streaming platforms because it's at your fingertips. You go and watch it whenever you want.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's brought about on a slightly somewhat unrelated note is, again, it's a slight on regular TV, because how inconvenient is it when you have to wait for the next episode of a series? You know, like obviously when something's on demand, you just binge it all the way through, and then you sort of forget that this happens. Like when something's live on TV and you're watching it for the very first time. I remember this with Game of Thrones. I was watching Game of Thrones as it was coming out at the time, and when it was really getting towards the business end of things in Series 8, and we had that all-important final episode coming up, it was like, oh my God, I have to wait 7 days. Like you're so... And now that it feels almost alien to have that and to go through that. So I think that's the other thing with user generated content as well, is most of the time it's right there at your fingertips. You can connect with these people. It's instant.
Well, what's interesting there is Disney Plus are actually releasing episodes weekly for certain programs, like the Book of Boba Fett. Hawkeye, I believe, was weekly as well, and they did that with Loki and other Marvel related programs and other programs on Disney Plus. So it's really interesting how Disney are trying to preserve that weekly format, because there is an argument that if you binge something, you don't fully appreciate and absorb it. It's kind of like one and done. It's like trash material. Go next, which, you know, I can understand from a business standpoint, but yeah, like when you've got, let's say your favorite TikToker is making 20 videos a day, and you can just go on TikTok at any point in the day, and there might be new content there, not just from that creator but from a number of creators. Obviously, you know, you just want to watch it. You want to absorb that. Whereas television, like we say, it could be weekly, or if you get a dump of a season at one go, you still have to wait a certain period of time before the next season. Yeah,
and I think to sort of turn this, so there's another important statistics which I think has come out of this study, and it's one that, you know, I felt it was important to give it some airtime. So this same study found that 20 million creators in the US are monetizing their content online, which is a crazy number when you think about it. But even more impressive is that the average income for these online creators sits at $768 a month, which is, if you're in a position where you're monetizing your content and you're making any money from it at all, really, you're in a very impressive position. It's not easy to get to that spot. But to find out that the average is almost $800 a month, that's very impressive. And that's a number which I think shows the true value of, if you're wanting to get into this side of things and you have the opportunity to monetize your content, most people would see that as an end goal. That would be like, wow, I'm making $800 a month. I can pay my rent with this. I can do that with it. But whereas for that to be the average, that's really quite remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know over the last few years, YouTube AdSense has really clamped down in terms of how much money certain creators can make, and then other creators rewarding them even more. So it's a kind of a balancing scale. TikTok, on the other hand, have really tried to put a lot of emphasis on the creator fund and putting money behind that and into that platform, in terms of, money that users can make on there. And, just the other day, it was Isaac HP was on the podcast, and during the midst of his crucifixion kind of story, which is actually a fantastic documentary he released on you can't call it a documentary. I mean, it was real, but it wasn't. It's a short film on his YouTube channel. He was talking about he would go live during the midst of him being this Despicable Me character, and he would go live for hours and hours and hours on end with Happy by Pharrell Williams playing in the background, and he would just be eating bananas. And at first he was just doing that to help pay his rent, because live is a really important feature for creators on TikTok to make money. But then it spiraled, and it started taking on a life of its own, and that's what led to the short film The Crucifixion, which again I really do recommend people watch if you followed Isaac's kind of meltdown on TikTok. But it's really interesting, isn't it, when you think about that kind of money can be made by people who you don't need a $5,000 camera, you don't need editing equipment, you don't need all this stuff. You can just be filming that on your mobile phone and uploading that to the world. And if you've got an audience, you can make money. And that's so empowering, really, if you look at it.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's important to say that most of the mainstream social media platforms are ahead of the game. We've spoken about for a long time about Instagram are looking to bring in-feed shopping experiences, so you can scroll down and you can buy and shop for products as they appear in your feed and stuff like this. And we've seen Twitter and other places like that open up tipping. So it seems like these kind of statistics add somewhat of a explanation for the recent trends that we've been seeing. And when you see that in concrete and you see that the sheer numbers and the value of this industry is really impressive. I found that particularly not just the 20 million creators in the US alone that are monetizing their content, but for that average figure at about $800 a month is quite incredible, really. So, but the other side of this, and to put a professional spin on it, what do you think this means for brands? Because TV advertising has for a long time been the pinnacle of widespread content marketing. If you get your ad, primetime TV, that's it. And I think you have to look at the sort of fable of Super Bowl ads and that side of things. But is user-generated content perhaps not as widespread, but do you think it's maybe more valuable? It's more personal, perhaps? So what do you think we're going to start to see a shift there in how major brands advertise their products and services?
Yeah, well, I think to go quite deep into this topic, I think first you have to start with, like you said there, Dan, about television, and obviously Super Bowl adverts being so lucrative and so important to a lot of big brands. And when we look at the reason why the Super Bowl is such an important place for brands to advertise is because television-wise, it's if not one of the biggest and most watched events of the entire year in America. Like it's unquestionable, really. And this is where Nielsen come into it. So Nielsen are an incredibly powerful figure in America because they provide the insight and data and metrics into what people are watching. And obviously television shows that we know and love live and die by the sword. They're either cancelled or renewed based on this Nielsen data that is being published. So when your favorite show has been cancelled early, it's because from the Nielsen sample size, not enough people are watching it, and that's what a lot of executives and big organizations make decisions based on. The interesting thing, though, about Nielsen is that it's only in around 40,000 households. So if you actually think about the size of America, and obviously the fact that a lot of this program is being viewed around the world. 40,000 people are deciding the power of brands. They're deciding the future of television shows, and that's why at the back end of 2021, there were a lot of executives who are very unhappy with Nielsen, especially during the pandemic era, saying that they were misreporting data because it is such a small sample size. Now, if we flip the coin there and we say, well, why is social media any better? That's because social media sample sizes are, to our knowledge anyway, 100% reflective of the entire user base. Yep. Whereas Nielsen is this small percentage that is supposed to reflect everybody. Social media like TikTok, Facebook, they can get you as a brand the stats right into your hand, down to a T, on who's viewing your content, where in the world, how many seconds they're watching, how many minutes. It's incredibly powerful, and it's more accurate and more reflective. So if I was a brand and I'm thinking, if I want to get a true representation of how well my product can do, whether that's, as an advertiser or as a product creator, somebody making a film or a television show, my immediate thought is digital. Netflix can give more accurate statistics than Nielsen can. And obviously, as we've said, social media can do that as well. So if you're weighing those two things up in 2022, I think we pretty much know which is more important, and that's what the industry is reflecting now.
Yeah, 100%. And I always think with like the Nielsen statistics, do you not think that there's a word for this? And I actually did psychology at A level, and there's a word for it when you're being observed and you change your behavior to act in a way that you feel like you should. And I think I would get this like if I was under Nielsen were watching me, because it's like, I spend so much time in my own time like watching like the arse end of television, just like random crap that's on. And if I had a Nielsen box, I'd sort of be like, I should probably watch like the news or like Discovery Channel or something like this, because these are probably really important. And I always think this, like, it would definitely change my viewing habits to know that everything that I was watching, down to the second, the channels I was watching, the shows, it would definitely impact the way that psychologically I approach my television. So I always think that there's probably a little bit of a caveat with those numbers anyway, just because of human nature.
Just like a giant goggle box, basically.
Exactly. I think there's a Family Guy episode where Peter gets the Griffins become a Nielsen family, and it encapsulates just like, actually, you do have to take those numbers with a pinch of salt, but you're right, they are so valuable. And so I think, to take it back to our most recent Social Jar episode, Christmas TV ads, when I was going through sort of the ones that had been released, well, now last year in 2021, I was watching the TV ads on YouTube. I hadn't actually seen them on TV, so I was having to go on YouTube, search for the TV ad, and watch them on YouTube. I was like, I swear this is actually quite a backwards way of doing things. But maybe it'd be interesting to see how, as I said, for brands, this change. I mean, I don't think we're going to see anything too drastic too soon, but that user-generated content and influencer marketing and that way of getting across to your users on social media in a more personable way might just be, as I said, not as widespread, but maybe more valuable going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like we're saying, the one side of it was the business side, but then in terms of actually getting to the audience, people don't necessarily, it's weird, there's been a number of research about it, but people don't trust brands trying to sell them their product, which is kind of like, well, duh, it is propaganda because they're trying to sell your product, which is why influencer marketing and the rise of people like Molly May have become so important in our not only our industry, but in terms of global outreach. People trust people at the end of the day, and if a brand pays somebody X amount of money to advertise whatever it is, a perfume, makeup, and they are then supposedly organically marketing that to their followers and audience, the audience think, oh wait, well, if Molly May's telling me to get this and Molly May uses it, then I want to use this as well. Now, obviously, a few years ago, a lot of people got into a bit of trouble with this. A lot of the Geordie Shore peeps as well. We're in some legal issues in terms of promoting things that literally they knew nothing about. They were just paid money. They promoted it, and then it kind of the regulatory unit of this kind of stuff, they were like, whoa, hold on a second, like you can't be selling things to people knowing full well that it might be a terrible product, without actually informing them that this is a paid advertisement. You're being paid to do this. And that's why now you'll see it on social media. A lot of users have to use the hashtag ad, or they have to at least specify in the copy or in the content that this is a paid advertisement, as to make sure that everybody who is watching that content is informed that yes, they are using another person to market the product, but please, this is literally there's no difference here. In terms of you're watching an advert and then you're watching your favorite influencer sell you that product.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is that's the only problem, and that's why I think perhaps brands are especially major brands, a little bit sensitive to get involved with this, user generated content, and are still opting for more to like traditional advertising forms, because it's completely under your control. If you're putting out a TV ad, you can control the entire advert, the messaging, how it looks, how it's presented, when it goes out, what channels it goes out, what audiences you're approaching. Whereas if you put, you choose to sponsor an influencer, or you give it to how they deliver the message is in their control ultimately, especially when it's live, and you said you do have those other problems. We've seen so many influencers associated with particular brands who end up getting, cancelled or whatever because of something bad they've said in the past. You put it, as soon as you put it out of your hands, there are more risks attached with that. And I think for now, whilst there are still, as I said, there is only that 1%, 38% of all hours watched are still the more traditional mediums. And I think whilst it's still that close, and even if the sort of new wave mediums end up overtaken by a slightly more considerable margin, I still think major brands will still opt for more traditional methods because it's still totally in their control.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could argue, because I've got a statistic here from Kepios saying between October 2020 and then 22, 409 million new users joined social media. So as of when they last did their report at the end of 2021, 4.55 billion active users are being reported. Are 4.55 billion people watching television?
Probably not.
And that's why the industry is changing. And I completely get what you're saying, Dan. Like, television allows the advertiser to have a bit more of a control over it, but the trade-off from that is who is actually watching that, who's going to see that advertisement. Whereas social media marketing and influencer marketing, you actually wrote a fantastic article about that on uniformbrand.com, is becoming more, what a great plug, is becoming more prominent. And there are definitely reasons as to why that trend will continue as well. Yeah,
100%. But in my humble opinion, do you want to know the number one form of advertising in the world? Pre-movie cinema ads. They're so much more engaging because you're like, wow, it's on a big screen, that you're so much more inclined to watch them. Like, I spend, every time I go to the movies, it's like every ad that comes up, even the trailers, there's nothing quite like going to the movies, watching every trailer thinking, God, I'm definitely going to go and see that, and then definitely not going to see it.
I don't know. Like, I'm luckily been to the cinema quite a lot in the last few months, most recently being Spider-Man. But with those adverts before, especially for the trailers, you're like, I don't know if you're just so engrossed. You're like, I'm really going to go watch that. And it's like you never obviously go and watch it. And it is funny because you're immersed in that experience. Whereas you take yourself out of that environment and you watch the exact same film at home in your own space. You're like, oh, piss off.
Exactly that. But this is going to be really interesting. I thought it was important to kick off the year this way because this is a hugely intriguing study. As I said, I think it's one that we thought we'd set up the year with because it's going to be interesting to see how this develops. Maybe not necessarily in 2022, but beyond. Exactly what this kind of data and this shift in how we engage with video content, which is the king on social media at the moment, and across the board, it's video content that reigns supreme. Just how we engage with it and what it means for the more traditional media forms will be really interesting to keep an eye on this year, won't it?
Definitely.
So that rounds up the first social jar of 2022, back and better than ever before. Well into double digits now. Episode 12 we currently sit on. Looking forward to getting into it in the coming months. Getting back to a regular schedule was a bit of a crazy end to 2021, wasn't it? It feels good to be back on the show with you, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want you to tell us right now, are you going to call it 2022 or 2022?
I'm flittering between the two.
You are, I can tell.
I don't like, I'm still I can't quite believe, even like, I don't know how it must feel for like my parents and stuff like that, but it still feels like a space age, man. Like I watched Back to the Future, and when did they go forward to? What was it, like 2015 or something
Yeah,
like that?
something like that.
And the fact that I'm now here in 2022 feels 2022, so maybe that's what I'm going to go with. So yes, the first Social Jar podcast of 2022, that's what I'm going to stick with, is a wrap, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for watching and all of your continued support. We'll see you next time.